you believe and every belief you act on is grounded on your assumptions about how the world works based on your past experiences. And whether or not you're even conscious of it, all of that is hanging in the background of your mind at any time. Okay, sorry. So all of that's hanging in the background of your mind, informing everything that you do at any given moment. So the idea is that the past is always bearing down on the present. You're always existing as your past self and your present self, all at once. So what the digressions are doing, and what the footnotes are doing, right, is helping you see that in these people. Because this is especially the case when we talk about, for instance, dysfunctional families, right? When we have relationships with each other where a person does something, and to an outside observer, it seems like the smallest thing. Why does that matter, right? But one person sees it and says, "You always do this," and all of a sudden there's this huge fight. And there's this huge fight because both of those people are carrying the entire past of their relationships between them in what they're doing now in the present, right? It comes to bear in their psychology. And what the footnotes and the sort of jumps through time are doing is helping you see all of this through the Incandenza family and a number of the addicts. A person will say something to another person and there's a footnote, and you're like, why is there a footnote there? And then you go to read the footnote and you get a 3-page story that's about this thing that happened between these people that you now understand as structuring the entire moment that's occurring between them, right? That's what he's trying to do. Yeah. Those are the 3 themes that I think can probably try and help you get through this book, right? It's about addiction and how addiction relates to consumption in American society, right? It's about trying to use literature to represent the dignity of people that would oftentimes be forgotten or not represented. And it's about how the past haunts all of us, basically. What you can keep in mind as you try and read this. This is like me trying to part with some advice, right? I've got some do's and some don'ts for reading Infinite Jest. Do. Get lost in the moment. Don't worry about whether or not you're doing a good job of reading Infinite Jest. Worry about whether or not what's on the page in front of you is something that seems to have any kind of entertaining or intellectual merit. Try to learn about any new subjects that the book brings up, right? Like the Wikipedia vortex, right? If you start to see something that's an interesting concept that's being raised, and you have to sort of like read up a little bit on that concept, even if you have to set the book down, these books want you to think that that's actually a productive educational impulse of reading them, right? So take it as an opportunity to learn more about this world that you will never understand in its entirety. Do try to find empathy for realistic characters that are usually overlooked by fiction. And keep in mind that some of these portraits are going to be absolutely harrowing, right? And that's a part of why he thinks it's important to present them. And do try to have an engaged intellectual interest in the philosophical conversations. When people decide that all of a sudden they're going to stop and talk about how game theory informs international relations in the Cold War, right? This happens when they're playing, the kids have developed this tennis game, right? That's meant to like, kind of like Risk, but it like several orders of magnitude more complex, where they use a supercomputer to sort of like simulate nuclear war. I heard, right, that the website has the music video that simulates that game, am I right?
I know Kara's got it on, maybe on our blog,
okay.
I think. Yeah, but yeah.
So if you have a hard time with that scene, some people do, the music video actually dramatizes it very well. And shows you how it all works. But like, when people are having these conversations, you know, try not to get bogged down in asking yourself why we're having this conversation, right? If the conversation is one that seems like it might be interesting, just have the conversation, right? And see where it goes. Do not worry if you can't see an overall point. I promise it's not because you're not smart enough, it's not because you don't have good taste, it's not because you lack enough knowledge, right? This book is trying to confuse you because they think there's a philosophical point in being confused, right? So don't worry about that. Don't get down on yourself, okay? You can do this. Don't assume that the confusion means you're missing anything. You're not. Don't expect that every question you have is going to have an answer. A lot of the questions actually do have answers if you search, but not all of them do. And don't assume that they will. And don't look for the book to ever tell you what the point is. If you keep reading through this, one of the most frustrating experiences you're going to have is that people will always be asking you, oh yeah, I've always meant to read that book, what's it about? And you will not be able to answer that question. And if you try, you'll sound like a jerk. And I've had this, like pretentious, and I've had this experience many times, and you know, that's just part of the territory. And remember, persevere. That's how I got through Gravity's Rainbow. My best, least intellectual, most AA advice, one day at a time, right, is to just grind it out. That's how I got through the book. To just be, if I'm really gonna do this, right, if you're as stubborn as I was and just weren't gonna let yourself not finish, right, is to just sit down and be like, I'm gonna read my, you know, whatever it is, 10 pages a day, 20 pages a day, 30 pages a day. I would not recommend ingesting more than 30 or 40 unless you're, I mean, I do sometimes, but I'm more used to it. But whatever your limit is, right? Do your little bit every day and just do it and just move your eyes over the page and don't worry about how much you understand it, and you know, you will get to the end, right? If you do that. And you will get to the end having learned a lot and having come up with a lot of opinions, whether or not you think that you understand what the entirety of the book is. There's actually a strategy. I've never taught this book in a class, but I've taken some classes on Ulysses, and I've thought about teaching a class on Gravity's Rainbow. I don't know if people would take it. But one of the strategies for reading these books is actually to have people spend the first 3 weeks reading the whole book. And what they do is they actually just say, okay, I'm going to give you 60 or 80 pages, and if you do that 60 or 80 pages like every day, you'll actually get through this 900-page monster in like 2 or 3 weeks. And what I'm telling you to do is to just read through it and just keep moving. Don't stop, don't reread anything, don't ask any questions, don't even worry if you understand it or not. Just get your eyes over all the words. And you'll come in 2 times a week with me and we'll talk about basic themes. And then once we've done that, we have some sense of like what the book's structure is, and we remember every part kinda, right? And then you spend the next 12 weeks going through the book 100 pages at a time, right? And really digging into what it's doing. And I'm not suggesting that anybody do that now because it's hard enough to get through it once, but I mean, it is just something to say that in your first pass in one of these books, like, if you need to find a way to just enjoy the process of getting through it, because you're not going to finish it, and just get it, even to the extent that it can be got. All right, and then the resources. So most of my outside information came from these sources, and you can use them as much or as little as you want, but all of these big books oftentimes have some compendiums and some resources that you can use to help you through them. So I just thought I'd tell people about them. One is Robert Bell and William Dowling's A Reader's Companion to Infinite Jest. This is a fantastic technical breakdown of the plot and structure of the book. So it's got a glossary that tells you what all of the made-up terms and all of the slang, the accurate slang, mean. So that, you know, it'll explain to you that eliminating your map means killing someone. And whatnot, that Bing is cocaine, that Bob Hope is what they call marijuana, all those kinds of things. It also has a fascinating chapter where it gives you a summary of the arc of every character's plot. It has a section where it actually goes through chapter by chapter and summarizes the plot of every chapter, so if you were confused what was happening, you can find it and read the plot summary. And it also discusses the key themes. If you want to get a little bit more advanced, but still quite accessible, Stephen J. Byrne, he was out at WashU giving a talk once. He's a nice guy. He's one of the main Wallace scholars. He has this book called David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, A Reader's Guide. This is the 2nd edition, and it's better, and you want to make sure you get the 2nd edition. Okay. But it's just basically got a sequence of like 4 or 5 essays that are about 15 pages long each of which tackles like, one is like, what's he doing with the plot structure? One is, what are his aesthetics? You know, one is like, where does he sit in literary history? And you know, it's a little more English professory, but it's still written to be about as accessible as it can be. So it's not that difficult. And something that you might want to keep open on your computer if you have one next to you while you read is the Infinite Jest Wiki. I gave the URL here, which I guess people can, if they can see that on the screen, they can write it down. But you can also just Google Infinite Jest Wiki, and probably actually the first thing that will come up is the Wikipedia entry on the novel. But the second one will be the wiki, which is a user-generated sort of annotation, page-by-page annotation of the book. It is not useful in the way that these are, but this is kind of its strength and its weakness, because all it does is just define every single word that might be confusing. And it doesn't do anything else. So normally when you see these things, they might explain pop culture references, or they might tell you this comes up again on such and such a page, or they might give you historical background. It doesn't do any of that. So if you want that, you gotta look elsewhere. But if you just wanna know what like every mathematical or chemical term means, right? Or like what the translations of all the different languages that are getting used are and stuff like that, that will tell you. And it goes page by page by page. So you can just keep it open on your computer, and every time you hit a page, you're like, what does that mean? And you flick over and look, and it'll tell you. And then if you're interested in doing some outside research, D.T. Max wrote a book called Every Love Story is a Ghost Story. That's basically the biography of Wallace. And it's actually what began the sort of biographical turn when people started talking about like how much of the man himself is just present in the book. Before it had long been speculated that he had been in a halfway house somewhere in Boston because of the way the book was written that nobody knew. Like the specifics of his drug use were not clear because he had never spoken much about it, but that's all more known now. So, yeah, that's what I have.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I would applaud, but a single person applauding doesn't sound very good. I'm going to stop right here and